Good day, Dragon Slayers. Amidst all of the storm and fury out there, I have an opportunity today to discuss a delightful topic and a very, I hope, inspiring topic. My guest today is Steve Dunn. Steve Dunn is a sports writer who's written a number of books, but in particular, he's written a book about the history of professional baseball in the great state of Iowa. So, I guess the first question I have, and Steve, the podcast really is about heroic transformations. My own book, Dragon Slaying, discusses that at some length. And you talk about a time right at the birth of baseball and how it set roots in the Midwest and Iowa. How did you happen to decide to write this book?
Well, I've always been a baseball fan, especially a Chicago Cub fan. The first few years of my life were spent around Chicago in the suburbs. So my dad was taking me to Cub games in Wrigley Field when I was probably starting from the age probably 6 on up. And of course, those were in the 50s. Those were pretty bad days for the Cubs. They didn't have great teams, but they did have a few great players like Ernie Banks, who's still my favorite all-time ball player. And throughout the years, I've just followed them. I followed baseball. I like the baseball history, especially. I've done 12 or 13 biographies for the Society for American Baseball Research on players and 12 game stories about particular games for Sabre. So I really love looking at old newspapers and, just anything about baseball, starting from after the Civil War is really what got baseball going. There had been some games played before the Civil War, but after the Civil War really took off. Like Des Moines, a couple of years after the Civil War, they had 9 baseball clubs. These weren't professional teams, but they were clubs playing baseball in Des Moines. And a lot of the small towns in Iowa had community teams, non-professional, but they would play other teams, in the area. So it really grew after the Civil War. So I started talking with in 2016. I was an usher with the Iowa Cubs, the AAA affiliate of the Chicago Cubs, and I interviewed Sam Burnaby, who's still the president, general manager of the Iowa Cubs, and I was going to do a story about the ballpark and the franchise for Sabre because it's the smallest market in AAA, but they still draw 450 to 550,000 people a season, which in the minor leagues is considered very good, and especially since they're the smallest market. Des Moines is about 200,000 people. There's about 500,000 people in the metropolitan area. So I thought I had, but each year after that, I kept up with the team, any improvements to the ballpark, any outstanding games, players. I just kept doing that until last spring. I thought, well, I might have enough here for a book. So, of course, I didn't have that much about the early beginnings of the team. I wasn't that familiar with the very early beginnings. So I went back through newspapers.com, looked at old newspapers, even going as far back as 1886, 87, old Des Moines papers, and researched the very beginnings of the club. And a lot of the people in Des Moines would recognize a lot of these early names, like Charles Sherman, the son of Hoyt Sherman, a famous Des Moines person who was the first postmaster of Des Moines. He was the quartermaster for the Union troops in the Civil War. He got to know Abraham Lincoln real well. And his son was this Charles Sherman. Hoyt was the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, the Union general in the famous March to Georgia. So there's a lot of local U.S. history there.
I'd like to go a little back into deeper exploration of, let's talk about Abner Doubleday and how the game began and how that mystical decision of the baseball diamond came about, and how is it that the distance between the pitching mound and the plate is only what is the distance?
60 feet some inches, 90 feet between the bases.
And it seems to be almost timed perfectly for a really fast guy to make it down the first baseline while hitting a ball to third base, which is really testing the mettle of both the fielder, first baseman, and the runner. How did that come about?
Well, I think Alexander Cartwright was really the designer of the baseball diamond before the Civil War. And I think he was the one that maybe even made up the rule. There were different rules played. The game began on the East Coast, and there were some different rules played by various sections of the East Coast. But finally, I think he settled that his ideas for the rules were generally adopted eventually. The distance between the bases, I think, has always stayed the same. The distance between the plate and the pitching mound, I'm pretty sure that has fluctuated over the years, although it's been this present distance ever since I can remember. But I think it might have been even a shorter distance at one time. The height of the mound, of course, that's changed over time too. I mean, back in the late '60s, they had a lot of outstanding pitchers like Bob Gibson, Don Drysdale, Sandy Koufax, Ferguson Jenkins, and the offense really took a downturn in the late '60s. So to increase offense to get fans more excited in the game, they lowered the mound, and I forget by how many inches, but the mound was lowered back in the late '60s to put more offense into the game. But I don't know how they originally came up with the 90 feet. I don't know. It just
Well, it just seems to be almost perfect in terms of timing for an infield hit. I would say the other thing I'm aware of in terms of a transformation is the emergence of the live ball. Tell us about that.
well, yeah. Major League Baseball is often disputed that there's a live ball, but oftentimes players, coaches, managers swear that the ball has been juiced up, although Major League Baseball denies that. I think the balls are made overseas, Central or South America. I think in the very beginning they had a different core to the ball, and of course the balls early on they would use the same ball. If it went into the stands, the people in the stands had to throw it back. So by the ninth inning, the ball was pretty dirty and disgusting, which probably helped the pitchers no end because it's hard to see a dirty ball, especially as the sun went down before lights came on in baseball.
Well, I would imagine that the pitcher could get a better purchase if the ball was scuffed as well.
Exactly, and they would put saliva on it, throw spitballs. Spitballs weren't outlawed until 1920, I think. But the guys who were throwing spitballs were grandfathered in, so they could keep throwing spitballs until they retired.
I never knew that. Okay.
Yeah, but then I think in the 20s they did start to allow fans to keep the baseballs. That was kind of a big deal because some of the owners, of course, were, I wouldn't say skinflints, but they wanted to save as much money as they could. So they didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on baseball, so they encouraged fans to throw the balls back.
When we spoke yesterday, you were telling me that there would be exhibition games of some elite immortals like Lou Gehrig, Bob Feller, and so on. How did that come about?
Like, of course, Babe and Lou Gehrig they were famous for barnstorming. Oh, back in the late 1920s, they put together a barnstorming teams, and they would travel all over the country, especially in the Midwest. And of course, back then, the furthest city in baseball was St. Louis. There was nothing, past St. Louis going west. So people, and before television, they only knew about baseball by listening to it on the radio. And unless you live near a big city, people never got to see these players in person like they do nowadays. So the Babe and Lou formed teams, and they would go on exhibition tours after the season was over. They would play local teams made up of semi-pro players, players from the lower minor leagues who maybe lived there. And yeah, they'd play a regular 9 inning exhibition game. It didn't really count towards anything, but it spread baseball through the smaller towns and the rural areas especially.
Well, I can recall as a small boy that in the days before the expansion of television, most of us were anchored to the radio to hear play-by-play descriptions. And there were some real artists. I remember as a little boy, I had a period of time when I had sinus headaches and I had to lie in the dark and all I could really do, I couldn't, although I was an avid reader, I couldn't read because it hurt my eyes. So I would listen to baseball. And at the time, there was a retired all-star right fielder for the Detroit Tigers named Harry Heilman, who did the play-by-play broadcast on the Detroit affiliate. I think it was WJR, CBS affiliate. Uh, and he was followed ultimately by an equally proficient third baseman, George Kell. Uh, and so they were the voice of baseball. And they were so good that you could actually visualize what was going on in the field coincident to their play-by-play. It was of interest that Ronald Reagan got his start reading essentially play-by-play based on the telegraph, and I think he did it in Chicago, did he not?
For a station in Des Moines, Iowa. Yes, he worked here in Des Moines. I guess I should have put that in my book. Thanks for bringing that up. If I do a sequel, I'll have to include him. Yeah, he would read the ticker tape or whatever you called it back then. He would recreate the games.
Well, the telegraph would came in, and he'd embellish it.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And I think they had sound effects too, like when somebody would hit a home run, the crack of the bat, they would have sound effects that would imitate the crack of a bat. People cheering, they probably had or some taped as people were cheering. Of course, back before TV, early days of TV, I've seen pictures of people in the big cities hanging out by the newspapers or the places where they sold TVs. They would have the game on the World Series, especially, and the people would be watching the game through the store window, watching the game, or going down to the newspaper, and watching as the score came in, what each batter did. So,
Who were some of the early heroes that you had a chance to meet and interview?
well, as far as for the book, I did mostly by looking through old newspapers. Of course, a lot of these guys are long gone. Um, other than Sam Burnaby, he's still, the present GM of the I Cubs. Can't think I've really interviewed anybody for the book per se. It's most researching archives, old newspapers. Been down to the State Historical Society Research Center downtown, looked up some stuff. The Des Moines Public Library, their research department was very helpful. So,
Now, was there a Negro League affiliate in Iowa as well?
no, the closest thing was the Kansas City Monarchs, but the man who founded the Kansas City Monarchs was Wilkinson. He's on the Hall of Fame, and he was a white man. It was pretty unusual, but he founded first. They were called the All Nations Club, and they were based in Des Moines. Um, let's see what I find the days. Like 1912 to 1915. And the reason he called it the All Nations Club was because it had blacks, Japanese players, Mexicans, South Americans, which of course was very unusual. I mean, blacks weren't allowed to play Major League Baseball then, but he had these all sorts of nationalities on his team. They're called the All Nations Club. I think the last game they played in Des Moines was 1915. Then a year or so later, he set up shop in Kansas City, Missouri. They became the Monarchs. And the Monarchs were a powerhouse in the Negro Leagues for like 20 years, produced some great players.
Didn't you tell me yesterday when we did kind of a prelim on this that an established elite pitcher, Satchel Paige, squared off against a youngster, Bob Feller, uh, and kind of a transgenerational competition. Tell me about that.
October 7th, 1936. Feller was 17 years old then. He was just a high school kid from Van Meter, Iowa, a small town west of Des Moines, rural area of Iowa. But he pitched against Satchel Paige in an exhibition game at what was called Western League Park. It was on the north side of Des Moines. That's where the second night game was ever played in baseball under permanent lighting. That was played in Des Moines too in 1930. So, but the Negro National League All Stars beat the Major League All Stars 4-2. Although the reports I said Feller outpitched Page by not by much, but here's a kid 17 going against arguably the best pitcher maybe in the whole world in Satchel Paige. And Feller was still in school, so he finished his senior year, I think, in Van Meter. He couldn't play high school ball his senior year because he was considered a professional.
Well, I guess he showed them, huh? So when did he break in with the Indians?
I think it was it 37 or 38. I mean, he was still a teenager, but he pitched. Well, I think once he got out of school, and he signed a contract with Cleveland, and yeah, he was pitching in the major leagues at a very, very young age, and he did well. And then, of course, after his senior year, he was full-time pitcher and took off. He's easily the greatest Major League Baseball player from Iowa.
Okay. Well, for a little bit of trivia, I guess we are all aware that in 1949, with the backing of Branch Rickey, Jackie Robinson broke the color line as a rookie with Brooklyn. But what is not well known is the following year, two other players entered the league from the Negro League. One was a young center fielder named Larry Doby, who joined the Indians, and a first baseman outfielder named Monty Irvin, who joined the Giants. And then ultimately, Major League Baseball realized that they were not recruiting the very best talent if they excluded people from the Negro Leagues.
No, Robinson had played for the Kansas City Monarchs before he got up to the major leagues. The Monarchs also produced like Elston Howard, Ernie Banks, Gene Baker, who was a second baseman for the Chicago Cubs, who teamed with Banks, the first black double play combination in Major League history in the mid 1950s. I've read that Robinson had a tryout with the Boston Red Sox before he ever signed with the Dodgers. I think they didn't. I don't think they were really seriously about signing him, but they just thought it would look good if they gave a black a tryout. Because they didn't. The Red Sox were one of the last teams to integrate. I think the first player was a Pumpsy Green, and 55 or 56. So they were late in the game as far as integrating.
I think the Detroit Tigers did not have a very distinguished record in terms of inviting in African American players either. I think largely because of Ty Cobb, who was an unapologetic racist, and it was unfortunate.
So Ty was a great ball player, but not a very nice human being.
Well, I do recall that Detroit did have a wonderful ball player, Hank Greenberg, a Jewish young man who played first base. And Greenberg ultimately was, I guess, traded in 48, 49 to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Detroit seems to have that capacity to let go of the really great ones. I think they've traded away Justin Verlander, John Smoltz, God knows. All right. Well, actually, no, they traded for Colavito for Keene, Harvey Keene. Yeah, the shortstop. Anyway, so Greenberg is at first base for the Pirates, and there's a very close play at first base, and he collides with Jackie Robinson. But he had the kindness to introduce himself and say, I hope you weren't hurt. Glad to have you on board. So it was much more of an inclusive spirit, at least from a guy who'd been through it in Detroit. Because I'm sure that along with African American people, Ty Cobb was not terribly much of a fan for Jewish people as well.
No, sad to say. There's the Iowa Cubs have a Jewish first baseman. I didn't know he's Jewish till I read about it in a Sabre publication about past and current Jewish players. Matt Mervis, they call him Mash Mervis because he's a big, powerful guy. He's been up to Chicago a couple of times. He hadn't done real well up there. They haven't really given him a real shot up there, I don't think. But so I don't know what his future is as far as the majors. He might get traded at the trade deadline. Who knows? Well, he's hurt now, so yeah. But he's Jewish.
Well, I would hope after people like Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax for the Dodgers, Jewish boys will at least get a shot. Uh,
Koufax didn't even pitch in some games because they fell on Jewish holidays, so he wouldn't pitch. It happened in the World Series at least once. There was a game on his regular schedule. He should have pitched, but he said no. It's a Jewish holiday. I'm not pitching, and he didn't. And that was in the World Series.
maybe one of the reasons he had such longevity, he didn't burn out. Okay. Uh, how do you think baseball became our national pastime?
Of course, this was before football. Well, it's the oldest sport by far. I mean, pro football started in the 1920s, but it didn't really become the sport it is until the 70s, probably 80s, when they started getting the big TV contracts. Pro basketball didn't start until after World War II. Hockey is more of a Canadian sport. So baseball's got a head start on everybody else.
Don't say that hockey is a Canadian sport if you happen to travel through Detroit or Boston. Yeah.
But yeah, now hockey's expanded. I can't get over hockey teams in Florida and Arizona. They just that doesn't seem right.
Well, I don't think we would have uh, teams in Arizona, the D-backs, without air conditioning in indoor stadiums either.
Oh no, I'm sure not. Although, of course, the teams have trained out there for years. Of course, that's in the spring when it's not that hot. But yeah, you wouldn't want to play out there in the summertime. Although Phoenix was a minor league team once, Tucson had minor league teams. Uh, I think Yuma had a minor league team in the Padres, so they must have been playing in July and August with no indoor stadiums. That would have been brutal.
Well, we have a AAA team here in Reno, the Aces. We also have a team in Las Vegas. I recall a few years ago, my son and I uh, took a car trip around. He was in Hoboken, New Jersey at the time, and we left Hoboken and just did this extensive car trip up to New Hampshire, largely because it was a little cooler there and we could eat all lobster all the time for our meals. But what we delighted in is there's a bunch of these little towns that had amateur or semi-pro baseball clubs. So you could go, say, at 7 o'clock every night and see a free baseball game, which wasn't bad at all.
It's probably Cape Cod League. That's a famous. It's the high ranking college players who play there during the summer. There's been several guys come out of the Cape Cod League. I know Kyle Schwarber is one of them. We toured New England back 2021. My wife and I took a Colette tour up through the islands of New England, so we saw a lot of that, and we stopped in towns that had Cape Cod League teams, and there were signs and plaques devoted to the teams and the players who had made it to the big leagues. I know Schwarber was one of them. But those are your better college players.
For our listeners and viewers out there, once again, Steve, if you could show us your book entitled, sorry,
Pug, Fireball, and Company, 116 years of professional baseball in Des Moines, Iowa.
it should be colorful. Okay. Are you actually giving talks in local Des Moines bookstores?
Well, I've had several book signings. I got one August 3rd at the Barnes and Noble bookstore on University Avenue in West Des Moines. There's two in West Des Moines, but this is the one on University Avenue. And yesterday I set up, this is kind of neat. There's a new downtown Des Moines bookstore, art gallery, and I'm going to have a book signing and talk about the book from 4:30 to 6:30, August 29th, and it's before an Iowa Cub game with the Memphis Redbirds, who are the AAA affiliate of the St. Louis Cardinals. And the Cardinals, of course, and the Cubs are very big rivals. So whenever Memphis comes to town, you get a lot of St. Louis fans around the area come to the game to cheer for Memphis. Of course, the Cub fans cheer for the I Cubs, and they go back and forth. It's quite a game. So people can go to the book signing and then go to the games. It's a 2-for-1 deal, and they're even going to serve root beer floats at the one in downtown Des Moines.
So you can get your calories and you can get educated about baseball. And
Right, and then head to the ballpark and watch a baseball game. Yeah, it's in tandem, artists and authors bookstore art gallery. It's on Third Avenue downtown Des Moines. Third and Walnut. Third and Walnut.
I hope sometime if my travels take me there, I'll have a chance to meet you there, shake your hand, and
Yeah, come to Des Moines. Pick a game when they're in town. Yeah, go to a game or two. It's a nice ballpark. It's been kept up real well. It's one of the oldest AAA parks, but they've kept it up great. The former owners, led by Michael Gartner, who was a NBC news executive and was Tom Brokaw's boss, was a majority owner for about 20 years. And they really kept the park up during those years. They added digital video boards. They just kept the park up real nice. I hope the present owners now do the same.
well, I've noticed, just a little plug for our own team, the Aces, that the quality of the experience at the Reno Aces ballpark surpasses that I've seen in major league ballparks. There's great views of the field. It's not quite as crowded. The fans are really into the game. Uh, so I do encourage people to support your local teams. And it's these local teams that you have an opportunity to see either uh, extraordinary baseball players near the end of their career or younger players on their way up.
Yeah, some of the biggest attendance games in the Des Moines franchise history have been when players came down here on rehab. Like Harry Wood was down here 3 or 4 times, did amazingly well. That one of his rehabs, his final rehab, is in the book. Talk about that. Mark Pryor kind of was equal. He pitched here when in his before he went up to Chicago. After he went up from Double A, he pitched in Des Moines, did real well. He even hit 2 home runs in one game. Besides, getting the win. I think it's first maybe home runs he'd ever hit minor league ball, but he got a standing ovation for hitting home runs. A pitcher. Well, Ernie, the Cubs and the Iowa Oaks. They were the Iowa Oaks before the Iowa Cubs. From '69 to '81, they were the Iowa Oaks, affiliated with the Oakland A's, the White Sox, and Houston Astros one year. But so they would host exhibition games against their major league affiliate, and those are all written about in the book too. So yeah, so at 54, I think 55, the Cubs played in Des Moines at what was then Pioneer Memorial Stadium. I mean, it's where Principal Park is now, but it was the first iteration of the ballpark. He played in the game against the Des Moines team. I think he got a hit. I think that was the only time he ever played here. He was never with the Des Moines team because, of course, he went up from the Monarchs directly to Chicago in '53.
Well, Steve, thank you for sharing your story with us. I hope there'll be other opportunities to talk to you about your interest in baseball and sports. Maybe we can reconvene this as we approach World Series time. All right, my friend, I look forward to talking to you again. Be well, and for all of you folks out there, be safe, and we'll catch you next week on Dragon Slaying Podcast. Later. Bye-bye.
Bye.